In this video, I'm going to show you how I process raw photographs inside of Luminar. I'm going to use this photograph I took underwater of a great white shark. The first thing I'd like to do here is do a little bit of cropping. I used a very wide-angle lens with this image so I can see both the cage up on the top left as well as a little bit of the cage that I was sitting in when I photographed this. So I'm inside of Edit. I'm going to go over to the Canvas section and then select Crop and Rotate. I want to keep my aspect to the original ratio, so I'll keep all of those settings intact inside of the panel, and then I'm going to crop this photo so I no longer can see those cages. So I'll bring it in from the left. I can see it over there on the right. Crop it in. I'm also really watching the fish at the top. I won't be able to get all of them fully inside, meaning I'll have to kind of cut some of them off, but I want to make sure that I'm not kind of cutting them off in a weird position. So I'm going to kind of maneuver this around and see what I can get while still actually maintaining and keeping that cage out of the shot. I'm going to go ahead and bring it up a little bit from the bottom. And I've got this one in. Might be able to get that top one in there as well, but I don't want to get it too close to the bottom fin of the shark. It's kind of a balancing act when you're doing this kind of cropping. So right now I think what I'm going to go for is I want to make sure that these two little fish here in the top stay inside of the frame, and then I'll just have to cut off some of the other fish there. So I actually think this is a pretty good start. I'm going to fiddle with it just a little bit more. No, actually I think that's pretty good. So I'll keep it there, and I'm going to click Done at the top, and I think this is looking pretty good. Now I'm going to jump over to the Essentials category to start processing the photograph. I'm going to start out inside of the Light tool, and the very first thing I want to do here is fix the white balance. When photographing with RAW, I have full control over that white balance, so I'm able to kind of play with the native settings. And usually when I have images like this, where I was about 30 feet or so below the surface with really good light coming through, there's definitely still some color there. Right now everything is just a wash of blue, but if I take the temperature slider and push it all the way to the right, I've added yellow now and I've taken away a lot of that blue, but I can still see a green tint in the photo. So I'm going to go to that tint slider and then push that all the way to the right, adding magenta, which kind of negates that green tint. Let me do a quick before and after so you can see that color change. And I was really able to bring back some of the natural color of everything under the water there. Before I make any changes to the tone inside of the light panel, I'm first going to go down to AI Enhance because I really like to work with those sliders before I push anything else such as exposure or smart contrast. So I'm going to go down to AI Enhance. I'm going to take the AI Accent slider and I'm going to drag it to the right while I'm watching my photo. Sometimes I like to push it pretty far. I want to see kind of what Luminar thinks should be done to the photo. And I'm going to land about halfway inside of the AI Accent slider there. And if I toggle that off and on, you can see it's added some good contrast and brightness to the photo. But now I'm going to go back up to that light setting. I'm going to go down to the smart contrast and add a little bit more. So I'll increase that smart contrast to the right. I have it set just at about 20 there. Let me do a quick before and after. So this is looking pretty good. Now I'm going to jump over to the Creative category and play with some of the tools in there. So I'll click on Creative on the right. And I'm going to start out with Mystical. Mystical is a good way to add a little bit of glow and some contrast and a touch of saturation to a photo. So I'll take that amount slider and I'm going to push it to the right as I'm watching my photo. I have it set to about 37 there. Let me toggle this off and on. And I like what it did to kind of the atmosphere of the image, but I don't like what it did to the shark. It adds a lot of glowiness around the shark, and I just don't like that look. So to correct that, I'm going to mask away that specific tool, but only on the shark. Inside of the panel, I'm going to click Edit Mask and select Brush. At the very top, I want to make sure that Erase is selected. Oftentimes, it's going to be Paint for your default, so you just need to make sure that you've clicked the proper mode that you want to work with. I'm also going to make sure my opacity is kind of low. Usually, it's going to start at 100%. I'm going to move mine down to around 60. Sometimes I like to brush effects with lower opacities. It just allows me to kind of layer them and not have such a harsh transition around the edges. So now I'll go inside of that shark and I'm just going to brush away. I'm not really concerned about the edges too much because I have that lower opacity. I am going to reduce that brush size slightly and then brush again, but try to kind of maintain the brush strokes within the shark. And you can see that red overlay that was over the shark, showing the effect still on top of it, is now starting to really disappear. So I've masked out most of that shark, and just for good measure, I'm going to feather that mask edge just a little bit. So I'm going to start out by clicking the eyeball in the top left, and that just gives me a constant preview of my mask. Then I'm going to click the mask dropdown. I'm going to go down to feather, and I'm going to increase it, and while I'm increasing it, I'm watching that image, and eventually it really starts to feather. And at a higher setting there, about 116 it looks like, that looks like it's going to be a good feather for that masked edge. I'm going to click Done at the top, and then I'll go over to that tool, and I'm going to toggle it off and on, and I could see I was able to subdue that glow around the shark. Next, I'd like to have a little bit of fun and add some more of the sun rays to the image. There are already some really beautiful natural sunbeams shining through the water. This is what you get when you're photographing underwater on a sunny day, but I'd kind of like to intensify it a little bit more. So I'm going to go up to the sun rays tool, and I'm going to start out by increasing the amount. I like to do that so I have a good idea of where those sunbeams are actually falling on my image. Now, of course, I don't want the sun inside of the water, so I want to move it off of the screen. When you're using the sun rays tool, you can't really zoom out very far. 25% is about the maximum that you can zoom out. So what I like to do is I like to shrink my window down, which gives me a little bit more room on the top and the bottom. So I'm going to exit out of full screen mode here. And I'm going to resize my window. And now I'll click Place Sun Center, and I can click and drag it way off of the frame. I'm trying to kind of mimic what I already had there with those beautiful sunbeams. So I think putting it about right here, trying to match the spread as well, and that seems like it's a pretty good spot. So I'll go ahead and click Done, and then I will bring my image back into that full screen mode. Let me toggle this off and on so you can see what that did to the photo. Now the intensity is quite a bit, so I'm going to reduce the amount slider. I'm just watching my photo as I'm doing this. I can kind of move it around to get a feel for what it's doing. I can also play with the overall look if I'd like. Moving it far to the left is going to kind of really intensify it and make it more dark. Pushing it to the right is going to bring back a lot of the original. I kind of liked the default, so I'm just going to double click that setting, and it just brings me back to the way it was. Down at the bottom, I'm going to increase that sun rays warmth as well. That will make those actual beams a little bit warmer and a little bit more yellow. And I really like kind of all the rest of the default settings here, but one of the fun tools you can play with is this randomized setting. As you slide it around, you can see kind of a strobe effect of where those beams are changing. And at 62, I actually kind of like it, but I'm going to go back to what it was before, and I think I might actually bring it back to that setting. It kind of surprised me with how I liked the way it was set. So let me go ahead and toggle the before and after of the sun rays. I think I'm going to reduce the amount just a little bit more, and maybe even decrease that look. And I'll toggle that off and on. I think one more thing I'm going to try, though, is I'm going to go down to the sun rays length and maybe decrease it a little bit, because the original sunbeams don't go down as far as the default setting there. So I think that actually did a better job of kind of making it look a little bit more real. So I'll toggle that off and on, and I think that looks great. Now, something I do see inside of this image I'd like to kind of take care of is I'd like to clean up some of the little specks and spots inside of the frame. So I'm going to go up to the canvas section and click Erase. Next, I just hover over the image and I click over the little spots. I can also reduce the size of the brush and just make a bunch of little taps and change that brush size as needed. And if I see something that isn't just a speck, I can sweep over it. There's a little bit down here. I like to try and keep the brush size just a little bit larger than what I'm trying to remove. Once I'm finished, I'll click on Erase at the very top. Luminar will work its magic and remove all of those little spots. That did a really good job. I can't really see any indication that I made those changes. So I'll go ahead and click Done. I'm going to go up to the Layers panel, and I'm going to do a quick before and after toggle. I'd like to see all of the edits I have so far. I think one last thing I'd like to do here is kind of play around with some different looks to see if I can add a little bit more style and maybe change the color a little bit. When I add a look to a photo, especially one like this where I've made a lot of changes, I like to do it on its own layer. That ensures that the look that I apply isn't going to overwrite anything that I have, and it makes it really easy to kind of change and manipulate the settings inside of that look if I need to. So next to the Layers section, I'm going to click that plus icon and select Add New Adjustment Layer. Next, I'll go over to the Looks section by clicking it on the top. And in the bottom, I'm going to click the categories and select one of my own. I'll select Heirloom Color. One of the neat things about the looks is that you can hover over them, each of those thumbnails, and it will give you a preview of what those looks look like. That way you don't have to constantly click through them and wait for it to apply. You're able to see a quick preview so you can make a much easier selection. I'm going to choose Heirloom Color number 4. Now I'm going to hide those looks at the bottom. This look is way too intense, so over in that layer, I'm going to take the Adjustments Amount slider and drag it to the left. Let me toggle this one layer off and on, maybe down a little bit more so it's about halfway. And I think that looks really good. Even though it changed the color, I really feel like it brought back a lot of the original image.